In today's video lesson, we are going to explore the equivalence between fractions, decimals, and percentages. We are also going to talk about which ones it's better to memorise or know off by heart, and then which ones you may need a method for converting. If you want to take part in any of the activities, you will need something to write with and on. Now, conversions between fractions, decimals and percentages can be on both non-calculator and calculator papers, and when they're on the calculator paper, they are simply just testing your ability to type the value into your calculator and use your calculator well to get the conversion back out. What we're going to do today when we are converting is looking at methods to use when you don't have a calculator. So we're focusing on the non-calculator side of things, which is why it will be beneficial for you to try your best to do this without a calculator. I'm going to jump straight into the video, so if you need a bit longer to read the task board, then pause the video now and hit play when you're ready. The first thing you need to understand is that every fraction and decimal have an equivalent pair, where they are equivalent in value. They are the same number. They are just written in two different ways, and we can write numbers in different ways depending on what we want to use them for. One you may be familiar with is a half. A half as a fraction has the same value, is the same number as the decimal 0.25. They're just written in different ways, but they are the same number. And then alongside that you have percentages, which tells you what proportion of a whole one the value that we are working with is. So for example, a half is 50% of a whole one, and 0.5 is 50% of a whole one. If you take a look at the circles I've got on the screen, you can see that they are all a total of 1. When we're talking about fractions, a whole one is just the number 1. So if I share that evenly 4 ways, in other words, I divide it by 4, I get 4 equal pieces, and we call each of those pieces a quarter, 1 over 4, or 1 divided by 4. If I'm using a decimal, the total is still 1, I've still got a whole 1, and 1 divided by 4 as a decimal is 0.25. So what we can see there is a quarter, the fraction, is the same size as 0.25, the decimal. The pieces are the same size. And likewise with percentages, a percentage is measured out of 100%. So that's where it's slightly different to being out of a total of 1. In the percentage scale, the total is 100%. So when I divide that by 4, I get 25%. But what you can see is all three things are equivalent. Now, when you're going into your exams, there are some fractions, decimals, and percentages equivalents that it can be really helpful if you just know them. So know them by heart, know that you've memorised them. And then with some of the trickier ones, it's easier to just know a method to convert them on the spot rather than having to memorise every fraction ever, of which there are infinite, so we wouldn't be able to do that. So I've got a few in my table. So we know a half is the same as 0.5 and 50%, and we've talked about a quarter being the same as 0.25 and 25%. Some people will also memorise a third, which is 0.3 recurring as a decimal. If you're not familiar with that little dot above the 3, that means recurring, and that just means that the 3s go on forever and ever and ever. So that's 0.33333333 forever. But a shorter way of writing that is with the little dot above the 3, and you can use that in your GCSE. And then likewise, the percentage equivalent of that is 33.3 recurring percent. That is one just to be aware of, because some people do make the mistake of saying a third is the same as just 0.3, which is not correct. 0.3 is a different fraction, and we'll look at that on the next slide. So there looks to be a lot going on here, so we'll break it down. So this one is for us to look at our tenths, if you like, or every 10%. So we've got the fraction and decimal scale on the top here, because it's easier to put those as an equivalent pair, whereas the percentage scale works slightly differently because it's out of 100. So the fractions and decimals are both out of a total of 1, but percentages are out of a total of 100. So if we look at the decimals, every tenth we are adding on 0.1. So it goes 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and so on. And we can see what fractions these are equivalent to in tenths, because 0.1 is 1/10. We can see that above. 0.2 is 2/10. 0.3 is 3/10. 0.4 is 4/10, and so on. Some of these fractions, however, can be simplified. So 2/10 can be simplified to 1/5. Now, if you're not familiar with simplifying fractions, I'd really advise you go away and watch my video on that first. I'll link it up above, and then this will be a lot easier for you. We've also got 4/10, which is the same as 2/5. We've got 5/10, which we've already looked at, which is the same as a half if we divide the top and the bottom by 5. We've got 6/10, which is the same as 3/5, and we've got 8/10, which is the same as 4/5. So what you can see here is some of these decimals we can equate to tenths, some of them we can equate to fifths, and some of them, or one of them, is equivalent to a half. So there are some of these that over time you might become familiar with, particularly if they're more simple. So you might go into your exam knowing that 4/5 is the same as 0.8. Or you might not. You might just remember that 0.8 is 8/10 and then simplify it in the exam. And then hopefully what you can see as well, the connection between the decimal and the percentage scale is very simple. 0.1 is 10%. 0.2 is 20%. 0.3 is 30%. You can see that same key digit used throughout. 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, and so on. And we'll look in a bit more detail about converting that on the next slide. So these are the main ones that you may wish to learn alongside those ones on that previous slide. So you remember 0.25, which would be in the middle here. So 0.25 was 25% or 1/4. So you might memorize that one. Given that 1/4 is 25% and 2/4, which is the same as a half, is 50%, you can see that's going up in 25s. We could also do 3/4 here at 0.75. That's one that some people memorize before their exam. And then the same with thirds as well. So we saw 0.3 recurring. Remember how I said that wasn't quite the same as 0.3? Hopefully you're seeing why now. It's a little bit more, which is a third, or 33.3 recurring percent. And likewise, 2/3 is 0.6 recurring, or 66.6 recurring percent. So those ones on the screen there are some of the ones that you would probably want to memorise before going into your exams. Anything outside of this will just convert. So we're starting with decimals here. So we need to be able to convert from decimals to percentage and fraction. And we need to be able to go from fraction to decimal and percentage. And we need to be able to go from percentage to decimal and fraction. So really there's 6 things to do. So let's start with our 0.34, first of all, as a percentage. It's really easy to get from the decimal scale to the percentage scale because we simply multiply by 100. A decimal is measured out of 1, and as we've seen, a percentage is measured out of 100. And so the percentage scale is just 100 times bigger. So whatever your decimal is, you multiply it by 100 and you'll get the percentage. So this one would be 34%. And then from the percentage, or from the decimal, whichever way you prefer to think of it, we can convert this to a fraction. Now, if you think about your place value digits, we've got 3/10 and 4/100, or, to put it a different way, 34/100. So I can write that quite literally as 34 over 100. Or, if the place value thing is a little bit tricky for you to understand, you can think of your percentage. We know a percentage is measured out of 100. And so you can write that as 34 out of 100 as a fraction. Either of those methods and ways of thinking will get you the same answer. Now, with this one, we can simplify it, but if you're not too confident with your simplifying and you just want to focus on this skill for today, then you're more than welcome to leave your answers unsimplified. Just remember that when you go into your exam, you will need to be able to simplify them. Both of these values are divisible by 2, which will become 17 over 50 in its simplest form. And then we've got 0.06 as a percentage. So just a reminder, we're multiplying by 100. So that would be 6%. If you compare the digits to the 0.34, you can see we've not got anything in that tenths column. which means we won't have anything in our tens column in our percentage. So it's just 6%. And as a fraction, again, we can go with 6 over 100, but that can be simplified. If I divide both numbers by 2, I'll get 3 over 50. Here are two for you to have a go at, exactly the same sort of setup. Pause the video so you've got time to answer them and hit play when you're ready to see the solutions. 0.27 as a percentage is 27%, and as a fraction, 27 over 100, which cannot be simplified. And then we've got 0.08 as a percentage is 8%, and as a fraction, 8 over 100, both of which can be divided by 4, which would give us 2 over 25 in the simplest form. On to our next set of questions. So 54% as a decimal. So if we're going the other way from a percentage to a decimal, we're going from the larger scale to the smaller scale. So we'll divide by 100. 54 divided by 100 is 0.54. And likewise, as a fraction, we're going to say it's 54 out of 100, which can be simplified to 27 over 50 if I divide both numbers by 2. 6.5% as a decimal, so we're dividing by 100 again, similarly to our 6%. If we remember on the previous slide, 6% was 0.06 as a decimal, so 6.5%, we're still going to need that 0.06, and then we place the 5 afterwards. So let's not confuse our place value columns and put our digits in the wrong place. And as a fraction also, so this one's a bit weird because if we start with 6.5 over 100, which is absolutely fine as part of your working out, but we cannot leave a decimal in a fraction. It's not the standard way of doing things. So if you left your answer like that in an exam, they wouldn't give you the marks for it. But as part of your working out, it's absolutely fine and you can write it down. But what we need to say to ourselves is if we don't want this decimal, we've got to multiply the top by 10. So I've times by 10 to get rid of that decimal, which means our times by 10 on the bottom, which will be 1,000. Now that answer is perfectly fine. Again, like with the previous one, if you think of this as no tenths, 6 hundredths and 5 thousandths, altogether you've got 65 thousandths. So you can think of it like that if you don't want to write it with the decimal at all. Either method is fine. But then if you come to simplify this, they are both divisible by 5, which would be 13 over 200. Once more, pause the video so you can have a go at this set of questions and hit play when you're ready to see the solutions. 70% as a decimal. Following the patterns we've looked at so far, you may have written down 0.70, and that would be correct, and you would get the marks for that in the exam. However, decimals with zeros at the end of them, we technically do not have to write down. So this one can also just be expressed as 0.7. But either way is fine. And then we've got 70 over 100 as a fraction, which can be simplified to 7 over 10. And likewise with this one, as a decimal, we'll have 0.074, which as a fraction is 74 over 1,000, which simplifies to 37 over 500 because both numbers can be divided by 2. And here is our last set. And going from fractions is probably the most challenging for some people, so we'll see how we go. What I would always suggest before you start this question is trying to convert your fraction to have a denominator of 100. If you can do that, making it a decimal and a percentage will be much easier because as we've seen on previous slides, when we've converted to a fraction, we've always gone for over 100 before simplifying. So if I want to make this over 100, I need to ask myself, how many 25s go into 100? And that's 4. And in which case I'll also multiply the top number by 4. 12 times 4 is 48. Now that makes that a lot easier. 48 divided by 100 is 0.48, and 48 out of 100 is quite literally 48%. So once we've got that over 100, hopefully you can see that conversion is much easier than trying to do it from 12 over 25. Same for this next one. I want it to be over 100, but depending on how confident you are with multiplying, you might not know what to multiply 40 by to get to 100. But we can use what I like to call a stepping stone. So if we can get this to be over 20, then we can go from 20 to 100, or maybe over 10 to 100. So use something you're confident with. So to get from 40 to 20, I divide by 2. 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. Remember what I said? We don't leave fractions with decimals in, but as part of our working, it's absolutely fine. And then to get from 20 to 100, I times by 5. And 4.5 times 5, well, 4 times 5 is 20. And 0.5 times 5 is 2.5, so 22.5. And if you have to use a written method to get around that one, then that's absolutely fine. So as a decimal, we're looking at 0.225, and as a percentage, 22.5%. For the last time, pause the video so you've got time to complete these questions, and then hit play when you're ready to see the solutions. Once again, let's get this fraction over 100 to make it easier to work with by multiplying 20 by 5. 19 times 5 is 95. So as a decimal, we're looking at 0.95, and as a percentage, 95%. Over 8, oh, this one's a bit tricky. Let's go over 4. I'm using that as my stepping stone. You could have used 2, you could have used 1, but both of those will be more tricky to deal with the 3 on top. And then from the 4, we'll be able to go up to 100. So to get from 8 to 4, I divide by 2. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. And then 4 to 100 is times by 25. One lot of 25 is 25. And 0.5, or a half of 25, is 12.5. So that's going to be 37.5 altogether. I'll just write those down. So one lot of 25 is 25. And half of 25 is 12.5. And if you add those together, you get 37.5. So as a decimal, we're looking at 0.375, and as a percentage, 37.5%. Let's have a go at some multiple choice questions now. I'll pop a 10-second timer on the screen. However, if timers don't work for you, feel free to pause the video and just ignore it. Our first question is express 14.7% as a decimal, and here are your options. The answer to that one was D. Here's your next question. Express 0.65 as a fraction in its simplest form. And here are your options. If you said A, you have written 0.65 as a fraction, but do remember the question does ask for it to be in its simplest form, so that would be C, 13 over 20. Now, I did say that if you want to do your answers without simplifying today, then that's fine. So if you are going down that route and put A, then you would be correct. But if you are looking to be simplifying because you're getting ready for your exams, 13 over 20. Express 7 over 25 as a percentage. Here are your options. And that one would be 28%, because if you convert your 7/25 first to be over 100 as a fraction, that would be 28 over 100, which is 28%. Well done. Here's the last part of the lesson, some independent practice if you wish to have a go at these questions. We have 7 questions on the screen, all mixed up to do with converting between all 3 of fractions, decimals and percentages. I will be popping the answers on the screen shortly, and I will do the answers for the fractions in the unsimplified and the simplified forms. So depending on which way you're going today, you will have your answer visible on screen. I'll pop those up in just a second, so pause the video now so you've got plenty of time to answer these questions, and hit play when you're ready to see the solutions. And here are your answers to these questions, so go through and check those. For question G, the order is at the very bottom. And there's something with that one I just want to point out. In your exams, when you're ordering, you will convert to a common form. In this case, we converted everything to percentages before putting our values in order. But notice when I put them in order, I put them in the format they were given to me in the question, and you need to make sure you do that too. If there's anything you're unsure about, feel free to go back and watch the examples. Sometimes it does help to just see them done once more, but if there's anything specific you want to ask about or you want a bit more guidance on, feel free to pop it down in the comments. We do try to respond to all questions and comments related to the content of the video. So we are here to help you out, so do just reach out if you need us. And all that's left to be said is a big well done for taking part in this video lesson today. Remember that every little bit you do in your revision will help you in your GCSEs. The more you put in, the more you'll get out. Remember to subscribe so you can find us again if you need any help with anything or you want more video lessons like this. And if you like short form content like quizzes and revision tips, we also post over on TikTok and Instagram. I'm Charlotte. Thank you for watching this video.